And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. And the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming. And the sign said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and whispered in the sounds of silence. The words of the prophets, do you hear them? Do you read them? Every year on Yom Kippur, we recite the words of the prophet Isaiah. Why, when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? Because on your fast day, you see to your business and oppress all your laborers. Because you fast in strife and contention, and you strike with a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast I desire, a day for men to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast, a day when the eternal is favorable? No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to ignore your own kin. This, from the beginning of chapter 58, which is where the Haftarah begins in Reform congregations, gets straight to the point. The ritual practices of Judaism are empty and meaningless unless they are intertwined with the every single day work of walking on an ethical path that we find in the teachings of Torah. When we declare in words of liturgy our desire to atone for the things that cause harm in our world and to others, the prophetic voice of Isaiah is there to remind us that this is an empty, performative ritual act if it's not accompanied by our actions. Abraham Joshua Heschel, great rabbi, describes the prophetic spirit as combining a very deep love, a very powerful dissent, a painful rebuke, and unwavering hope. Reform Judaism, the specific expression of Jewish life and Jewish values that our congregation affiliates and identifies itself with, emerged during the 19th and 20th century with a declaration that it was time to pick up the mantle of prophetic Judaism again. Too much focus on the minutiae of Jewish law and ritual practice had distracted us from the ethical and moral obligations of everyday life that were deeply ingrained in the Torah and exemplified by the voices of our prophets. Beginning in 1885 and updated several times during the 20th century, our movement put forth a series of platforms that defined the principles of Reform Judaism. Last updated in 1999, the Statement of Principles included the following. We bring Torah into the world when we strive to fulfill the highest ethical mandates in our relationships with others and with all of God's creation. Partners with God in Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, we are called to help bring nearer the Messianic age. We seek dialogue and joint action with people of other faiths in the hope that together we can bring peace, freedom, and justice to our world. We are obligated to pursue tzedek, justice, and righteousness, and to narrow the gap between the affluent and the poor, to act against discrimination and oppression, to pursue peace, to welcome the stranger, to protect the earth's biodiversity and natural resources, and to redeem those in physical, economic, and spiritual bondage. In so doing, we reaffirm social action and social justice as a central prophetic focus of traditional Reform Jewish belief and practice. We affirm the mitzvah of tzedakah, setting aside portions of our earnings and our time to provide for those in need. These acts bring us closer to fulfilling the prophetic call to translate the words of Torah into the works of our hands. In all these ways and more, Torah gives meaning and purpose to our lives. That was the platform. And it is because of this long-standing principle that defines Reform Judaism and for many decades set it apart from other branches of Judaism that were more focused on ritual practice or more insular issues, that we teach our children here at Congregation B'nai Shalom about social justice as an integral part of their Jewish education. We show them how ethical values found in our Torah can be applied to our homes, our communities, and our country. We take our 10th grade class to Washington, D.C. to learn how to advocate on contemporary social justice issues that impact our lives and the lives of the vulnerable in our society. Issues that are often impacted by what takes place in the corridors of our political institutions. We do not teach them to be partisan, but to recognize that the American constitutional foundation that gives each of us a voice as citizens can be meshed with our Jewish identity and the prophetic call to seek and pursue justice that is foundational to our Jewish faith. Rabbi Barry Schwartz, in his book, The Path of the Prophets, the lens of prophetic history is not power, he says, but justice. The concern of prophetic history is not conquest, but compassion. The heroes of prophetic history are not kings or generals, but visionaries and dreamers. They are the seekers of justice and exemplars of compassion. They are often ordinary people who have moments of extraordinary courage and insight. They are unexpected heroes. Last night, I shared the story of a young woman who was in many ways running away from the life that she had been leading. In the quiet of the Mojave Desert, she found her calling after witnessing what she came to realize was human trafficking taking place before her eyes at a distance. She became an unexpected hero to so many, working to shut down the brothels in LA that were imprisoning women who had been brought to this country through sex trafficking. She tuned in to the prophetic voice calling from within, and she found her calling. She felt the tug, the impetus to respond, and in doing so, she not only transformed her own life, but that of so many others. This morning, I began by presenting the impetus to respond to the prophetic voice that lies at the heart of Reform Judaism. And I want to raise up the examples that are all around us of those who have heard the prophetic voice within, the people in the midst of this very congregation, who exemplify what it means to respond to the prophetic call. Take, for example, our members who have brought their voice and their passion to lift up the urgency of environmental action. With the devastation caused by the fires burning up and down our West Coast, and the terrible flooding brought to the South, and the increased intensity and incidence of these events, scientists have long expressed certainty in the human impact on our climate. Those who are advocating and teaching others how to advocate, those who are organizing regionally, who are part of regional groups that are part of their national and international coalitions, doing work to help the environment. I see you. Let's take, for example, our members who have bravely spoken out in the face of the growing anti-Semitism that has resurfaced in our country. When we say hate has no home here, we must have the courage to speak up for ourselves as well as for others. We have to educate those who are ignorant of Jewish history and whose ignorance leaves them vulnerable to those who still target our people with their conspiracy theories. Those of you that are using your voice and your passion in this way, I see you. Over the summer, many in our local towns came together for peaceful vigils to offer their support to the work needed to address racial inequalities. Many of us took time to read, to learn, becoming more attuned to our own implicit bias and the white privilege to which many of us, even as Jews, are the beneficiaries. And some have gone further, organizing in partnership with local school districts to address racial bias in our schools and curricula, to work in cooperation with our local police departments, to look more holistically at the ways that we can create safe communities for all. To those of you that are using your voice and your passion to learn more and to continue to speak out against racial injustice, I see you. Then there are those who continue to tirelessly advocate for disability rights, to advocate for your children to have the access to learning that would maximize their potential that so many others take for granted, to advocate for the housing and transportation and caretaker support that would enable more people living with disabilities to maintain their independence and contribute to the workforce as productive adults. We've come some way over the past few decades, but you are continuing to lift up your voices because there is more to be done. I see you. And there are more, so many more. Those who are lifting up their voices to advocate for the safety and equality of those who are LGBTQ, those who are lifting up their voices to advocate for a woman's right to make choices about her own body, those who are lifting up their voices to seek a living wage that provides dignity to everyone who does a hard week's work, and access to affordable healthcare. Those who are lifting up their voices to support the right of the Jewish state of Israel to exist in the face of those whose criticism of her government has morphed beyond legitimate critique and into anti-Semitism in another form. Those who have been working to help the citizens of this country register to vote and ensure that they will have access to the ballot box this November. We have members of this community who are supporting organizations, advocating and acting on all of these and many more. I see you. This is what it means to be a Reform Jew. Traditionally on Yom Kippur, we hear the story of another rather perplexing prophet, Jonah. Perplexing because Jonah runs away from his task. After being swallowed by a big fish and praying to God, he goes to do what was asked of him, but his message to the people of Nineveh is just one sentence: 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. Jonah gets grumpy when the people repent and God forgives and saves the city. For those of us who are still searching for our inner prophetic voice, perhaps because we're overwhelmed by the brokenness that we see in our world, we are Jonah, and Jonah is us. Rabbi Dr. Shmuley Yanklowitz has written a new commentary on the book of Jonah, a social justice commentary. Through close analysis of many of the details of the short story, Yanklowitz raises up many lessons that we can learn about what it takes to raise up our own prophetic voice. He suggests that we might empathize with Jonah, who initially runs in the opposite direction. Nineveh, after all, is described as a great city. Why would it listen to one man? To stand up and speak out against an unjust society can be a daunting task. Yanklowitz reflects, to protest means to publicly declare that injustice and bigotry are unacceptable and that callousness must never be tolerated. Bearing witness and protesting are not just moral acts, but also deeply religious ones, he says. In the Jewish tradition, we are obligated at times to offer tochacha, which means reproof or rebuke when others are acting unethically. We are obligated to not remain silent in the face of injustice. And then, quoting Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, he reminds us that each of us has our own unique responsibility to find our purpose, find our cause, and find our voice. There is no life without a task, no person without a talent, no place without a fragment of God's light waiting to be discovered and redeemed. It may take a lifetime to learn how to find these things, but once we learn, we realize in retrospect that all it ever took was the ability to listen. When God calls, he does not do so by way of universal imperatives. Instead, God whispers our name. And the greatest reply, the reply of Abraham, is simply, Hineni, here I am, ready to heed your call, to mend a fragment of your all too broken world. Yanklowitz suggests that Jonah running away is a projection of our own fears and inadequacies. We prefer to sleep like Jonah does in the boat, to imagine that so long as I'm okay, all is well. The spiritual life, though, is about awakening our inner selves from the fog of self-absorption. Judaism is here, he says, to call us to our responsibility, to help us actualize our unique potential. Where Jonah fails, we can still succeed. The first step is choosing to be awake, to care, to see, and to hear the holy opportunities before us. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in an address to the Synagogue Council of America in the 1960s, said, "Today, we particularly need the Hebrew prophets because they taught that to love God was to love justice. They taught that each human being has an inescapable obligation to denounce evil where he sees it. The Hebrew prophets are needed today," he continued, "because decent people must be imbued with the courage to speak the truth, to realize that silence may temporarily preserve status or security, but to live with a lie is a gross affront to God. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because we need their flaming courage. We need the thunder of their fearless voices. Listen, Shema, listen to the inner prophetic voice that is waiting for your Hineni. Feel the tug of a world that needs your passion and purpose to help repair some of the brokenness that you see. In the words of Rabbi Tarfon in Mishnah Avot, you are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. Shana Tova.